How can accessing our unconscious mind help us to heal from trauma and achieve goals in the face of big constraints? All this and more will be revealed in today's training because I am answering your questions. Good morning. How are you all? It's Charlotte here, and I hope you're having a great week and enjoying the first couple days of February so far. Anyone doing anything exciting this weekend? I'd love to hear in the comments. So, before we get started, we are just going to talk a little bit about trauma because that was a question that came up, and it's something that we have covered a little bit but not extensively. So, this is not medical advice by any means. This is just me stating opinions from courses I've done and experiences that I've had. But we are going to talk about the context of one time learning, the concept of one time learning in the context of trauma. In my job as a physiotherapist, I work with many people who have been in motor vehicle accidents. And if you've ever had that situation before, maybe you can also relate to having been very comfortable driving your car on one day and then been in some kind of accident, and then after that felt really anxious or upset or just nervous about the car, or any weird drivers on the road kind of spike your heart rate up. So the idea is that trauma can either happen over a prolonged period of time, something like abuse during childhood or in a relationship, or it can be a one off event. So when trauma occurs, if you think of our threat bucket, we've got all of this information coming in. Trauma occurs and spikes up that water level so that we get all of these outputs. It could be anxiety, insomnia. Insomnia is one of the hallmark things that tends to happen with trauma. And then we are always on hyper alert because our amygdala, that threat detector in our brain, is constantly scanning because it's been primed to do so to keep us safe. So when we feel any kind of terror or helplessness or hopelessness, that can be one of the symptoms that we associate with trauma. And that's something that you can get help for and certainly recover from. I see somebody here. Good morning. How are you? Our first question, though, is I'm most intrigued by the unconscious mind topic and still want to know what the best way or ways are to tap into its benefits and what can it tell us for moving on from past trauma. So that's why we quickly covered a little bit about trauma. So just to reiterate, our unconscious mind stores all of our memories as well as all of the experiences we've ever had, even if we're not aware of them, hence being unconscious. If you think of a human being as having many layers like an onion, being able to tap into your unconscious mind is a bit like peeling back the layers and seeing what's underneath. And that means that once we start any kind of personal growth or healing journey, there can be surprises that crop up. And often, what we'll find is that when our unconscious mind is ready to have trauma processed, those emotions or sensations will start to pop up. Whether that's wanted or not is another matter. And what we need to be able to do is resolve or process those emotions so that we can no longer be triggered by, say, a driver cutting you off in traffic or the sound of sirens potentially, so that the associated physical and emotional sensations that we feel don't get linked to those triggers anymore. Have any of you read the book The Body Keeps the Score? It's a really good read, and it goes very deeply into this concept of how trauma impacts our physical health because of our body kind of, in an attempt to keep us safe, building up that hypervigilance so that everything seems more threatening and more dangerous, and then we can be protected. So we might always feel neck pain or headaches or any kind of reminder of the event can bring on feelings of, helplessness or terror, and then that keeps us away from the situation. Basically, it's alerting us that something's going on and we need to do something about it. And there are so many different techniques that we can use to gain access to that unconscious mind in order to figure out whether there is trauma that still needs to be resolved or processed. I've talked a little bit about hypnotherapy. So, using hypnosis or using hypnotic language can give us access to the unconscious because we are able to relax a little bit more. And in a relaxed state, this is an ideal place to get into those layers beneath the surface. Have any of you ever gone to counseling or a psychologist to do EMDR? EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and trained practitioners are able to use guided eye movements, or with a lot of my concussion clients who can't handle the eye movements, you can have these little buzzers going from side to side, and the switching over of inputs from one side of the brain to the other helps to process these traumatic memories and reduce their emotional impact. So that's another way that you can access the unconscious and then process those traumas. We often talk about self-reflection and self-awareness here, and those are really good strategies too, because when we can think about our beliefs and our behaviors, we can start to identify themes or patterns in what we're experiencing. And if your outside world is a mirror of your inner world, then you might start to look for those themes to see where certain events or experiences repeatedly pop up that could be addressed. So, by that, maybe I heard this example. I know we've talked about being cut off in traffic a couple times, but say you're driving in on the highway and somebody speeds past you and cuts you off. The idea here could be, well, maybe if things like this are happening, are you going too slowly in some other area of life that could be mirrored in the external example of somebody passing you because your speed wasn't great? Or could it have triggered some kind of like anger response in you that is perhaps a repressed response in a different part of your life? Maybe in your relationship or at your job, you are feeling slow and held back, and maybe there's some resentment or anger underneath the surface, but it never really gets expressed. So that would be an example of how to kind of start monitoring your environment and seeing what you can pick up in those patterns. Next, we have journaling or any kind of creative expression. So you can grab a piece of paper, write in your phone. There's so many different amazing journaling apps that you can use to write down even what your dreams are. So maybe you have a little notebook by your bed, and in the morning, as soon as you get up, you just take a few minutes and jot down your dreams. I don't know much about dream interpretation, but I have heard that it can mirror what you might be experiencing from processing the events of the previous day or whatever's going on in your life in terms of stressors. So you could just free write, journal, see what's going on. The thoughts that we continue to experience, and I guess the dreams we continue to experience on a regular basis, might give you some indication of what's going on in your unconscious and perhaps of trauma that could be addressed. Creative outlets like using art, listening to music, moving your body, dancing, doing some kind of exercise can be really great alternatives to processing and releasing emotions, and not necessarily having to bring about any awareness of it, just letting things flow in that state when you're deeply immersed in something creative. That can allow stuff to come up that maybe you weren't expecting to see. Has anyone ever had that experience where they've let the music take over and just started moving their body? Or maybe you like to do some kind of art and paint. Anybody? I definitely find that time passes much differently when I'm doing something creative and often faster. So I'll look up and go, oh, oops, like, gotta get back to whatever it was that I was doing before because this has taken hours and I didn't even realize it. So ideally, you're getting into, again, that kind of deep flow state and focusing on your task at hand. Mindfulness and meditation, which will bring us into our second question, are another two great practices that you can use to start bringing about that relaxation state. So, mindfulness again helps us bring awareness to our thoughts and emotions so that we can observe and maybe release them without judging. And when we're being mindful, the idea is to be fully present and engaged in whatever it is that you're doing. Whereas guided meditation or just seated silent meditation is when you focus on breathing or an image in your mind. And the idea is to achieve a heightened state of awareness and relaxation by changing your focus from what's happening externally to what's happening internally. And maybe you're saying an affirmation, repeating a mantra. The idea here is to decrease stress as well as promote that relaxation so that you can stay present in the current moment. And mindfulness and meditation really help to enhance well being and mental clarity. There's so much research on this now. If you haven't started doing it and it's not your thing, that's totally fine. There certainly are other ways to get more in touch with your unconscious mind. It doesn't have to be sitting still and doing something. You could, often I find like being on a run will be a very creative space for my brain and my thoughts to wander, or even in the shower, just being able to relax and not have any distractions. And on that note, we may or may not need that awareness of the trauma to resolve it. Some traditional techniques like talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy can be quite harmful for people in certain situations who have experienced trauma or post traumatic stress disorder, because when we have to bring up the trauma again and again in something like exposure therapy, this typically re-traumatizes somebody unless, and it always depends on the person, everyone's so different, but you can definitely re-traumatize somebody by asking them to talk about what happened again and again and again and again. Whereas what we tend to find more helpful is to create more distance from yourself and the event so that you can disentangle the negative emotions from the trauma and realize that they're two separate entities and they don't have to be intertwined so that trigger leads to some kind of emotional or physical response. We did just chat a little bit about mindfulness. Our second question was, we know and hear a lot about mindfulness and its value, but how does it relate to the unconscious, which kind of seems the opposite? So I think that question, and correct me if I'm wrong, the person who asked it is referring to the fact that when we are trying to access the unconscious, the key here is unconscious, whereas mindfulness is bringing awareness and consciousness. And it appears to be contradictory in that respect. But again, just like we were talking about, working on mindfulness is really helpful because it allows us to enhance awareness and reduce our reactivity to inputs. So whether that's being quick to anger or sadness, or there are challenging situations going on in our lives, the goal here isn't to avoid those difficult feelings, but to be able to start seeing things more clearly and understanding what's happening within us from moment to moment. So it's one of the ways that we can start to notice patterns, for example, that allow us to tap into what's going on in the unconscious mind, even though we are using a little bit more focus in this technique to create that relaxation versus in a meditation where we're just letting everything relax and letting the mind wander or be a little bit more open to whatever is coming up. And when we practice both mindfulness and meditation, this allows our brains to get into a frequency that allows us to access our creativity and allows that downloading of new ideas and inspiration. And often that can be a great asset because when we're stuck and feeling frustrated by barriers or obstacles in our lives, sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees and we get so pigeonholed down that being able to do these techniques and get out of our heads, so to speak, will enable us to be open to more ideas. Because if you think of your thoughts as kind of hitting these boundaries here, maybe you constantly in your conscious state hit the boundaries of where you think your life could be. Maybe you have no hope of ever leaving the job that you're in, or your relationship is okay but not great, but okay is better than bad, so you're happy with that. But if you pause to consider that you could have a career and relationships that were amazing and loving, then those boundaries disappear. And being able to meditate or do mindfulness can help push those boundaries out so that the world opens up in terms of possibilities for you. So that's pretty cool. If you are interested in incorporating mindfulness or meditation or journaling, any of those practices into your day, then I would suggest either doing this right before you go to bed or right after you wake up in the morning, because that's when we are in a more suggestible state. Food for thought. Even before you have like coffee, maybe have some water if you're doing it in the morning and then get into it, or play some kind of meditation as you're going to sleep at night. That has a huge impact on our unconscious. All right, we are on to our third question today, which is thinking about goal setting. How do we work around big constraints like family and work? So, for example, if we wanted to go for a run, take an hour, but our child needs help with homework, what do we do? And this is a great question because it's so realistic and everyone comes up against those constraints, right? Like, what are big ones for you? I know time can feel like that for me sometimes, finances, just limited resources. So, what I want you to do in this case is, first of all, identify why the goal is so important to you. And in this case, why would you want to go for a run anyway? Why would you choose to get out there, make yourself feel tired, wear down your body? I'm joking because I love running, but is this run a finite event? I just want to go for one run. Or is it something that contributes to your sense of self or your identity? I would suggest that if you can tie your goal to your identity, then that will help to strengthen that goal, because then it's not just, I want to go for a run, or I don't know, if you're building a business, I want to post on social media. It is, I want to be healthy, or I want to become an athlete, depending on where you're at, or I am going to build a business, it's not just a post on social media, it's linked to something bigger. And then deciding how badly you want it. If this is a must for your mental and emotional well-being, then I guarantee that you're going to find a way. Maybe you delegate homework duty on a couple nights a week to your spouse, if that's a possibility. Or perhaps you wake up extra early to get stuff done when nobody else is awake. Or perhaps the exercise and the run is more important to you at this point than your finances, so you hire a tutor so that your child can get help with their homework that way. There are workarounds, and like we just talked about with those limits that we have, when you can bust past those limits, there are options. Most things in life are possible. It's just whether we're giving ourselves the permission to see the options as a possibility. Does that make sense? So when you can start to see options that you've never considered before, and maybe that's by using some of the techniques that we started out in this training talking about, because we're able to access the unconscious mind and we focus our attention on what it is that we want, whether that's a run or financial security or a different job or a loving relationship. When your attention is focused there, you can let it simmer, let your unconscious mind simmer in the background and figure out how to make that happen. We are, at this point and we want to get here and we don't know this part yet, but where there's a will, there's a way. And even being able to talk about it with friends or ask for help will open up that world in terms of insights for you and give you a better idea of what other people have done and what might work for you. The thing that might hold you back in this case is the idea of secondary gains. So maybe part of you really wants to go for that run, but the other part of you wants your child to do well in school. Or there's another part of you that appreciates an excuse to stay indoors when it's pouring outside and you've told yourself you want to run, but you don't really want to get soaked. Identify what those are and then prioritize them. At least when you acknowledge them, you can start looking for solutions if the goal is important enough for you to be able to do so. And this is a story that might help, probably doesn't resonate with many of you, but in terms of secondary gains, let's say that you really like to, I don't know, go to a casino and spend money, but you don't want your family to know that you're doing that. So you do it in secret, you hide all the banking stuff, but really, like, these possibilities to win big riches are huge and you can't keep yourself from going. But you know that it's going to hurt your family if they find out. So your unconscious mind finds a way to do this for you, and you end up creating so much grief and strife in your relationship that your partner, your spouse, wants to separate. And that way, you don't hurt your family by gambling, but they do get hurt in another way. So that could be the secondary gain would be being able to gamble. And I know that was a weird example, but that's what I've got for you on a Friday morning. So, what we did today was talk about some of the most effective ways that you can begin tapping into your unconscious mind and use that to be able to process trauma, as well as how both mindfulness and meditation can be really valuable practices that allow you to access the unconscious. And then a few tips for questions or considerations to ask yourself when you have big goals that you want to prioritize, even in the face of time restraints. So, I would love to ask you if you have anything that you would like to accomplish this year, a big goal, and you feel some kind of obstacle has cropped up for you. What is one thing that you would do this year if you absolutely believed you could do it? Maybe it's finding a new job. Maybe it's starting up a clean eating program. I don't know. What is it for you? Let me know in the chat. And if you are feeling stuck and not sure how to move forward, at the moment, I am offering one-to-one success coaching at an exclusive rate for a really limited number of clients this month, just what my schedule can allow me. And when I say exclusive rate, I am serious. If you are interested, no obligations at all, but you're welcome to send me a message and I'm happy to chat about it. Otherwise, we are kicking off our self-love month with our training next week, and I can't wait to see you there. Hope you're having a great Friday and enjoy your weekend.